Yeah. There was a time when you had a sporting chance of being maybe the funniest, cutest guy in your neighborhood. But now, it doesn't matter where you are. You could be an incel living in a basement in Minnesota or Maine or Florida or Texas, and your social world is just everywhere, anywhere. Or excuse me, it's anyone, anywhere, right? So they're just seeing TikTokers. Their neighborhood, as it were, is just the online environment, and so that's got to be very overwhelming. The sense of celebrity that someone maybe going out to Hollywood in the 70s or 80s would feel, overwhelmed by these people who are just more impressive than they are, and all these, they look better, more charismatic, blah blah blah. Guys, people everywhere now are getting online and instantly getting that feeling. You don't have to go to official celebrity, a locale for official celebrity, and that kind of relentless sense of comparison and competition everywhere. Now everyone online is jumping on their preferred platform and getting that sense right away. It's sort of regionless now. It's harder to escape.
And absolutely, yeah. I think they would absolutely agree with everything that you just said. I think so. That's definitely the truth of it at this point. It's just overwhelming.
Yeah. All that goes for women though too. As bad as men have it, looks-based anxiety, by all accounts, it's much worse for women. I imagine a female version of me would be really freaking out about having crossed the 40 line. But as it stands, I'm like, I kind of prefer not to, but big deal, So women have a whole different set of anxieties. Maybe less. Maybe you can corroborate this. I feel like I'm repeating a kind of stereotype about this stuff. Not that stereotypes are wrong. It's a stereotype about stereotypes and all of that. But men feel more anxiety around status or income than looks. And that seems to comport with my own experience. Is that generally true, or do you think that's changing? Or
no, I think that's generally true. And if it is changing is actually a good question, because I do think that men are at a point now where they are very, very conscious of looks, especially young men, like we have been describing, especially that cohort of young men in the manosphere that we've been describing are very, very acutely aware of looks. They understand what the names of the bones in the face are and the ratios. They can cite that to you like it's a Bible verse or something. They are really in tune with physical appearance. They know about skincare routines and hair transplants and all of those things that perhaps men.
Yeah. I saw
it is.
I saw a tweet that said something like American Psycho did more for men's skincare awareness than like basically any movie ever, right?
So, but in general, I do think what you described is true. And I think that might come down to from kind of the observations that we see in psychology from the evolutionary psychology explanation. And that's that men are primarily attracted to physical appearance in women. Status, other things mean a lot less to men. But physical appearance, particularly youthfulness, is kind of a universally attractive trait to men. Women are more varied in what is important to them. When we see what women value as far as physical attractiveness compared to men, the research is mixed, but we see either that women value it as much as men do, or that they value it less than men do. But we never see, for example, that women value it more, although we do see in a lot of studies that men value physical appearance more. But women do value status more. They value income more. They value the level of education a man has more. So there's a lot of other cues. Women are kind of more varied in that respect as far as what traits in a man they find attractive.
Yeah, I don't think there's an equivalent for men to women's. I like the professor type. Right? The older established male. Yeah. I suppose I think the sexy librarian might only in a very superficial sense is that similar. So I'm curious. Do you know anything about the demographics of incels? So my sense is that it's mostly a white and Asian thing. Yet the condition of being involuntarily celibate is no more or less white or Asian relative to black or Hispanic. I think that there's a kind of a self-conscious adoption of an incel identity more among white and Asians, even though plenty of black and Hispanic men are not getting laid, but they carry on as if they are. They have a certain confidence that white and Asian men lack. I mean, that's just my reading. Do you have any information on that? Do you have any takes on that?
That's a good question, and I can't recall right offhand if one race is actually more overrepresented in incels. But as a general impression, I do kind of agree with that. As far as observing incel communities, you actually see a pretty good mix of individuals. There's actually a term that they use that's called JBW, which means just be white, where a lot of them say, just being white makes you more physically attractive, and white people have an advantage. So there's actually a lot of consciousness about the relationship between race and the way people's attractiveness and dating outcomes are related to race within incel communities, within the black pill, and to some extent within the manosphere as a whole, which kind of tells me that it's probably not just a bunch of white guys. It probably has
if that's
people that are
ideal. Sorry, if that's the ideal, just be white. Well, that would sort of frustrate my notion that it's mostly a bunch of white guys sitting around concerned about not getting laid because, well, they're already white. It's not helping them. But yeah, okay.
Certainly, I talk to many incels online and that sort of thing who are not white, who are Southeast Asian is actually very common. Individuals from India, for example, who have moved and are now, especially a lot of these individuals, of course, they are people that have moved recently, first or second generation, to the United Kingdom, to the United States, and there they are. Okay, they're a minority, racial or ethnic minority, in an area that is mostly white, and they feel that white people are perceived as much more attractive than they are, which is actually something that we see, for example, on dating app research, on attractiveness research, is that white people do rate other white people as more attractive. And even in some cases, for example, we see that Hispanic individuals rate white people as more attractive, or that Asian women rate white men as more attractive. This depends on the data set, but sometimes that is what comes out. So certainly, if it was all just a bunch of white people, I don't think that just be white narrative would have emerged as strongly as it does. But they seem to be aware of that relationship there between race, ethnicity, and perceptions of attractiveness and dating outcomes.
Yeah, it reminds me a bit of Elliot Rodger, that shooter in Santa Barbara years back. He half white, half Asian, and I think he expressed frustration with the Chris Hemsworth looking guys in his milieu that had more success, the Chads and the Stacys, and you basically do think of almost like an 80s caricature of the jock and the cheerleader, and so this notion of incels being white and Asian, I guess my notion is half correct in the sense that there's Asian men who are dealing with this or promoting this just be white, but the black and Hispanic men, I wonder where they are on this, because there's a popular notion, just I guess maybe it comes from well, if you're in California, just kind of living day to day, you see a differing levels of confidence and willingness to approach and cat call and all of that stuff. You would think that black men especially are getting laid all the time, because they don't seem to be suffering from this oh, she's not going to think I'm good enough, blah 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 kind of thing. But I suspect that they are largely as sexless, but they don't have a kind of self-adoption of an incel identity, which can reinforce this kind of sad sack mentality. I think black men are missing that. They may almost be going too far in the other direction of being a bit like deluded and overly confident, but it's gotta feel good to just not give a fuck, just keep plowing forward anyway, right?
Yeah, it seems like if they do have that attitude, it would be kind of protective of that mindset, because that mindset where you basically give up and you feel like you are unworthy or unattractive, it's not going to help anyone get a date in the future. It's going to cement whatever, if they are unattractive, physically unattractive, if they're the bottom 10% of men or whatever, having that attitude on top of it is just going to make it worse. It's not going to help it. So if someone was really confident, even if they were very unattractive or something like that, I mean, maybe it will work out for them anyway, just because they're trying and the other person isn't.
Right. I remember a friend of mine back when I was in, going out mostly every weekend to San Francisco events and parties and whatnot. I had a friend who just stuck around to the end every time, until the bar closes or until the party is done. And, he was kind of a wallflower, but he managed to just stick it out till the end. And he would just kind of incidentally get lucky from doing that.
Oh, I was going to say, that's very interesting. I spoke to a group of women once, and they were talking about basically name a time that you had sex with a guy just for like whatever stupid reason. And most of them were like, "Oh, I've had sex with a guy at least once just because he was there. He was and I think two of these women actually said, I just wanted to go home with someone, and he was the last guy at the bar. He wasn't even that attractive. I wasn't even that interested, but he was there." And it was like, wow. So that kind of that what you told me about your friend there definitely seems to confirm that. Just being there, just sticking around to the end and being there, it's eventually gonna work.
Yeah. And it's interesting how that actually implicates a kind of economic dimension to this too, because it costs money to stick around to the very end. I mean, I suppose you could try to nurse one beer for 2 hours, and try to make your dollar stretch, but, good luck with that. When you're already drinking, it's hard to stay on top of that kind of measured approach. But so you have to have the money to stick it out to some.
Yeah, and the time, which is related to the money, because if you can go and stay all night in a bar, which you don't have to work tomorrow in the morning, that sort of thing. So certainly, to be able to do that, definitely, exactly as you said, there's kind of a financial implication there, a socioeconomic implication.
Yeah. Speaking of money, so I made some notes here. Some of these are kind of like random one-off questions, and I think we already got over kind of talked through some of the bigger high-level stuff. I recall seeing once that a woman who, let's say we have a kind of careerist-oriented, maybe self-described feminist woman, professional class woman, when she meets a wealthy man and marries him, he has to, this is the kind of the factoid I recall, he has to be making about 200K or more for her to give up her own career and just say, I'm just gonna quit pursuing that and be like more or less a housewife. She probably wouldn't like that description, but maybe spend time volunteering or something. But in any case, kind of avoiding or bypassing your own career and your own attempt to make a lot of money. I heard that the figure was about 200,000. Do you have any data related to that, or that just like
offhand, I wouldn't be able to say for sure. I'm not that familiar with that. I would think that I would worry actually about if a very career oriented woman and they marry and then she gives up her career, if she would not resent the man after that, even if he made a lot more, because that's something that she would have invested a lot of time into. It's probably part of her identity, and to give that up, it seems like it would be a big risk, especially because that would be something as well we see when men and women get divorced, that women usually end up in much worse economic position than when they were married, and they usually end up in a much worse economic position than the man does after the divorce. So a lot of that is putting a lot of trust in the man. A lot of the time with some of these careers, especially an academic career, if she's something like a lawyer as well, or even a doctor for that matter, if she gives up that career, she may never actually be able to enter it again. So if she stops practicing medicine for 4 years, for example, 5 years, to update all of her licenses, to complete the ongoing education that she needs to keep her license current, something like that could be such a barrier that she might never actually enter the field again. So I would think it would make sense intuitively, knowing all that the man would have to be making a lot of money and offering a really good lifestyle, and she would have to feel very secure to want to give up her career.
I know exactly one person who did give up her career. She had gone to Bolt Law School, UC Berkeley Law School, and she had been like an editor of their law journal. And she met a guy who worked for Oracle and was making about 200K, and that was enough for her to say, yeah, I'm kind of done with this. She was willing to leave it behind. Now this was years ago, and I don't know how it's panned out, but yeah, that's a risk. Being able to re-enter the workforce on anything like the trajectory you were before.
Yeah.
So you had a post or a tweet talking about friends with benefits or situationships, and how I believe that has the number of people in the U.S. Claiming that was their situation, their kind of relationship status had gone up, I believe. Or is that what you discovered?
Oh, I would think it would be the opposite, actually. Something that has been pretty consistent. Recently, I looked at the statistics from the General Social Survey for the last 10 years, since about 2012, and the number of people that report being in a stable relationship or being married, it has remained about the same, even across all age groups. As far as that remaining about 40, well, it depends on the age group, but that remaining like 50 to 30%, if there's more people in situationships or friends with benefits, I'm not sure if that's the case, but one thing is that that would actually be a pretty rare situation. I think people actually overestimate the amount of sex that other people are having, especially the amount of casual sex. For example, when I looked at another GSS data set, which was basically sexual partners in 2021, how much sex people were having, who they were having sex with, and so on. About 85 to 95%, depending on the demographic, of people are having sex with a steady partner. So there's not that many people having casual sex. In that remaining 15 to 5%, a lot of those people will be having sex with someone who will become a partner in the future that they're just casually dating at the moment.
Yeah.
And very few people report having more than one simultaneous partner. So, for example, having like two friends with benefits at the same time, or a poly relationship, anything in that category, it's going to be like 3 to 5%. Very, very low. I think 5 might even be too high.
Yeah, being in the Bay Area, where the term polyamory gets around a lot, so to speak, it can give you a skewed idea of just how many people are doing it. Kind of, it's funny. The terms like the FWB or situationship, was it situationship? They feel like colloquial, popular notions of the same general idea, polyamory, except that polyamory is, I feel like it's this kind of high-minded thing that high IQ people in the Bay Area apply to themselves to basically describe you're just not taking commitment very seriously. Some of them really do have this sort of like rank order worked out. They use terms like they're my primary, blah blah blah, and they build some kind of like a lifestyle around it. But I think if you basically are just non-committal, just kind of fucking around, but you are in the orbit of Bay Area engineers and that kind of group, you might term your situation polyamory to give it a sort of gloss or something sort of socially legitimate or next level.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
a respectability in a way. Yeah, I think if you live, like you said, someplace in the Bay Area, because of course these kind of relationships and behaviors aren't randomly distributed throughout the whole United States. So certainly it could be that is much, much more common in California, in the Bay Area, like you said. And I think also, exactly like you said, some of that is probably to put a veneer of respectability on it when it's people that don't want to commit, or they just want to have sex with more people.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You might assume that people who are like that, they're into polyamory, they don't want to be tied down, that they're like these really attractive, high-income people that have their pick of the litter. They're not, though. Arguably high income. A lot of them, the engineers, they do well, but they don't look that good. And I actually recall a joke by Margaret Cho, I think, years ago, about the perception versus reality of what an orgy is like. You think it's eyes wide shut, but 9 times out of 10, it's like the kind of pudgy fans of Star Trek. And I've definitely seen that borne out in living in California. Yeah, the kind of people who do look like Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise and Eyes Wide Shut, they're demanding that you are exclusive. They don't do this kind of fucking around, at least not in some kind of formal orgy like polyamory way. They might be doing things on the side, but
Certainly. And actually, I think the research kind of agrees with you on those observations. I think it kind of confirms it, because at least for women, what we see is that the most attractive women tend to be more choosy with a mate. They tend to actually have sex a little bit less on average, or I should say, perhaps have sex with less frequency. Over a time period, they might have had more partners on average, but they tend to pick mates more carefully, which is actually something kind of we see in the manosphere, is that this idea that very attractive people are having a lot of sex, but that's typically not the case. The people that tend to actually be more promiscuous tend to be more kind of mid-level, at least for women. As far as for men, I couldn't say for sure. I would think actually that it skews more toward more attractive men actually being the ones that have more sex because they're able to. Yeah. But as far as women are concerned, there's a term called libido gap that they use. And I think that's probably explains some of it here, where if you're a very, very attractive woman, so you kind of have your pick of men, but since the vast majority of women are not highly promiscuous, they're going to be entering into monogamous relationships and kind of staying in them. Whereas women who have less options may be willing to have sex more freely as a way to kind of secure a partner.
Yeah.
And they may be more willing to compromise as well. for that matter, enter into kind of these poly relationships and be okay with a man that they're attracted to, perhaps sharing that man with someone else.
Yeah, the really attractive women, they're not having any of this open relationship business. I mean, to nearly the same degree as, other women, from what I've seen. But, I wonder how much something like, Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith and their situationship might skew people's perception of what rich, attractive people are doing, because they're in some kind of open relationship, I believe. Maybe not anymore. I don't know what's going on now, but so you might get the impression that, like, well, these rich celebrities, they're doing this polyamory thing because they're so beautiful and sought after. They don't want to be tied down to anybody. There might be something about celebrity specifically that tips people into the kind of polyamory camp, like some kind of eBay or irrationalist, incidentally, interestingly and funnily enough. But good-looking people in general are not really doing that.
Right, exactly.
Not as
I kind of wonder about the situation with Will and Jada, and I didn't follow it really closely, so I'm not the most informed on like what celebrities are doing. I don't generally follow them very closely. But I thought she cheated on him, and then didn't he get really upset and like cry on camera and everything? Which would kind of tell me like, well, was this really a poly relationship? Was this really an open relationship? I thought it was she cheated on you and you were like heartbroken about it. So now I wonder if they're saying it's an open relationship, it's a poly relationship, kind of to go back and put that veneer of respectability onto it, kind of like, hey, this is our thing and we're okay with it. We don't want any more prying into it. I don't want to look like a sad man because she basically cheated on me and had sex with another guy.
Yeah, true. It
so
might
I wonder,
damage control.
It seemed kind of.
Yeah, just after the fact. You know what? Actually, it turns out we were in a polyamorous relationship the whole time. That's what it was. You misunderstand.
Right. Exactly.
True. Yeah, I they might not have been like polyamory officially from the jump.
Mm-hmm. I would think with celebrities that they would be in an environment that would also make them a lot more predisposed to infidelity. Because imagine if this is with a woman and she's put into intimate contact with another man and they spend hours and hours and hours together every day, or the same with a man if he's spending intimate contact with a woman who's also beautiful, another star, on the set for hours and hours and hours every day, and attraction will develop. That's one of the ways that attraction develops to people is by proximity and frequency. Frequency and proximity are two very, very good predictors of who will enter relationships. And the vast majority of people, when they cheat, when they have an affair, especially as older adults, it's with someone from work. So it's kind of like, oh, well, you're spending a lot of time away from your partner. You're with this other attractive person. They're putting you into situations that are intimate for the roles and that sort of thing. So it's kind of like, would that create more infidelity? I could imagine that it would. I don't know for sure, but it's a yes.
Yeah. Bringing it back to economic or income, in this case, more like job situation, although it's tied to income. I recall reading that, high-income men who go on a lot of business trips can more, kind of makes sense, can more successfully cheat because they're not, shitting where they eat, proverbial. They can make sure that they're not, sleeping with someone else on the assembly line, which,
right.
I feel like it's just a matter of time before you're the person you're in a relationship with discovers that, right? So if you can fly around to different cities and have a woman in a different port, like that song from way back says, that helps mitigate your cheating, your infidelity ever blowing up and creating more dysfunction, which also has economic ramifications. So this kind of gets into a question of or hint at a question of the responsibility of the upper class to set a good example. But that, of course, that's a whole other question. I think I'm going to. Oh, right. You just said something a moment ago. I think it's good to end on. We're coming up on an hour. Messing around with people at work. With the rise of messing around with people at work, and the related question of should you ever, try to date someone from work? Should you approach? I mean, if that goes badly, it could be bad for your job as well. If the rise of remote work, I'm curious how much of that has basically been sidestepped, a lot of those concerns. On the one hand, it's good that you're not going to risk asking someone out and losing your job and getting some HR on your ass because you're not actually there in the office together. You can still do things online during, with webcams and whatnot. You can screw up, but sort of mitigates it, I think, to some degree. But the downside is that you might have approached someone, it could have gone well, and you'd have a relationship, and now that opportunity is taken away. So it's a sort of, it puts people on a path to sort of singlehood but safety, the remote work thing that we're dealing with now.
Yeah.
It might be too new. Is there information about that?
I think it's probably too new, but actually I can tie that into something that we spoke about at the very, very beginning, which is COVID and the dating apps. But first, I think it is a very good guess, and I think it may very well turn out to be the case that if more people are working remotely, infidelity will go down. How much it will go down remains to be seen, but that wouldn't surprise me at all if that turned out to be true, given the fact that so many affairs do develop in the workplace and develop specifically through that avenue of proximity, familiarity, of building intimate relationships with someone simply because you spend the whole day with them, and you only see your wife or your husband for a couple of hours. So I read a study just today. I had posted it on Twitter, and it was a review of a literature review of all of the research since 2020 on dating apps and how COVID affected relationships. And one of the things they found is, okay, so dating app use during COVID, it went way up. It went up like 700% in some of these apps like Tinder and OkCupid. The amount of messages increased that people sent. So dating app went up. The amount of sex that married people had went up. So married people spending more time at home, having more sex. The amount of sex that boyfriends and girlfriends had and that single people had went way down. So that seems to have the same kind of implications for perhaps people who are working entirely online as well, that it might have for people who were artificially forced to stay at home because of the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns. They can't go out and socialize, so they're not making those connections. They don't have that same ability to meet up with other people perhaps as frequently and have sex when they otherwise would have, which in the case of infidelity might have actually been in the workplace where they are having sex. And in the case of the dating apps, we'd be going on dates and going to people's homes and everything. So I think basically what it all boils down to is that if people are spending all of their time at home, they're probably going to date less. They're probably going to meet fewer people. If those are strangers they're trying to date because they're single, or if they're people they would have an affair with. Meanwhile, if people are in relationships and they're living with their partner, I think that might actually help them in their relationships. It might help them bond more with their partner. It might help them have more sex. They might actually have better relationships for it, spend more time with their kids. So those are kind of the upsides and downsides to that working at home, I think, as far as the way that it could impact relationships.
I remember thinking at the time that, when COVID hit, that whatever people were already doing just got strengthened and solidified. So if you were single and not going on too many dates, that just got worse. But if you're happily married in a house out somewhere in the suburbs, that just got reinforced. That became stronger. Your basic living situations. Right. Like whatever was happening in March was sort of frozen in place. Right. Okay, so yeah, enjoy Barcelona.
Wonderful. Great talking to you. I'll talk to you later.
Perfect. Bye.